Assalamu alaikum viewers, welcome back to Prime Live. We are thrilled to once again welcome back to studio our resident wellness expert Ronald Abvajee. And today we're going to be delving into the conversation around strokes and heart disease. Who is at risk? Why are you at risk? And what can you do to mitigate your risks of stroke and heart disease? So do stay engaged with us and also engage with us on our social media platforms if you have any questions about strokes or heart disease. Assalamu alaikum Ronald. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live.
Wa alaikum salam, and it's always good to be with you.
I mean, this is an interesting one, and I'm glad we're delving into this conversation. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you said it's not just elderly people that are actually at risk of a stroke, but we'll get into that a little bit later. What do you think are the top factors that put someone at risk of a stroke?
What I think and what people say are often different things. Many people will look at a stroke and they say, no, I have a genetic predisposition to it. Yes, there are genetic predispositions to it, but what are the top causes? We're looking at raised blood pressure and very high blood pressure. But before we get into that, what is a stroke? A stroke is the lack of oxygen and blood transfer through the blood vessels, which is called an ischemic stroke, to the brain, and that's the main cause that we then look at. And when we look at ischemic issues, remember that if the blood vessels are blocked and there's no blood going to the brain, that means no nutrients, and that means no oxygen, which means a stroke to the brain is like a heart attack to the heart. You will damage areas of the heart in a heart attack because of lack of nutrients and oxygen, and the same to the brain. So the top causes that we look at, yes, is high cholesterol, but mainly raised blood pressure and a lot of lifestyle conditions as well. So smoking, because that decreases the blood vessel size. Your blood vessels are not as strong anymore. You look at obesity, you look at those nuances, but it doesn't mean because you're overweight or obese, you will have a stroke, because people who are underweight and thin or muscular also have a risk. So those are contributing factors, but the main two are raised blood pressure and extremely high blood pressure.
And also when it comes to heart disease, I think there is also that misconception that only elderly people can become victim to heart disease. But can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the risk factors when it comes to heart disease? What are the risk factors that put you at risk of heart disease? And for those who are out there who have family members who actually struggle from heart disease, what are some of the things that you can say to our audience this evening that would help them think about why it's so important to take the preventative measures in order to avoid heart disease?
Your heart beats so many times a day, and without your heart beating, literally you're gonna die. Why? Because the heart pumps oxygenated blood through all the organs and fuels your cells to function optimally with oxygen and nutrients, and then takes the deoxygenated blood once oxygen is used and allows your lungs and your body to get rid of it so that you can bring in new oxygenated blood. But without your heart, you're at risk of disability, but also dying. Now, if you look at strokes alone, the World Health Organization says that approximately 15 million people this year will have a stroke. Now, of the 15 million, 5 million are physically disabled because of the stroke, and the other 5 million die, and the other 5 million recover. So it's a 1 in 3 chance, and the reality is that strokes don't just affect the elderly. Because it's raised blood pressure and hypertension, guess what? You and I, well, I'm not so young anymore, but you are, and younger are at risk of stroke. Now, stroke, hypertension, high cholesterol are the main issues that we look at. And at the end of the day, that is killing and impeding the fully functional ability of people physiologically. And that's in the millions. That's in the millions of people that are impacted and affected. So heart health is something we cannot neglect nor negate. And if you do have a genetic predisposition, then just go check it out even more so, because if it's in your family, you could be at a higher risk.
Now, let's talk a little bit about how to mitigate those risks. I mean, the statistics you just shared now are absolutely alarming, and we all should be worried, and we all should be taking into consideration our heart health and our overall health and well-being. And we definitely need to start taking tips and trying to change our lifestyles to be healthier so that we can mitigate the risk of heart disease and stroke. And like we were saying, it's not just the elderly people who have to watch out for these things. As you were saying off air just before we started, it's also the younger generations that need to consider their risks when it comes to strokes and heart disease. Can you guide us through some of the important things we need to remember in terms of taking those necessary steps to mitigate our risks?
Absolutely. And to emphasize the message of younger people are also impacted, that 1 in 4 people over the age of 25 will suffer a stroke in their life, be it mild or be it severe. There was 4 of us in the studio here, right? That means one of us will have a stroke.
I mean, I can't even bear the thought of that. And I think there's never been a more important time for us to have a conversation like this and encourage people to start taking control of their health.
Absolutely, and taking control of your health starts with knowing your numbers. How healthy is your heart? Recently, I went for a full executive medical with Lira, and I spoke to the MD of Southern Africa, Navlika Ratangi, and she shared with me that the reason they are pushing this is because if people know their health status, especially their heart health status and other risk factors, you can make informed decisions. So do you know that my blood pressure is 158 over 110? The normal blood pressure should be 120 over 90, right? 80, right? You're talking about there. Mine's 158. So the doctor wasn't too stressed because the doctor gave me insight. And he said, Ronald, contextually, you struggle with sleep. Your heart rate will be elevated. You have a genetic predisposition, which means I expect the elevated heart rate. But he didn't freak out because I did a stress ECG, and the stress ECG showed that my heart rate recovers quite fine. All that they want to do is something called ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, which takes a 24-hour measurement of my blood pressure and sees the peaks and the troughs. Guess what? I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go for the screening. Am I concerned? Of course I'm concerned. Am I doing something about it? Of course I am. And remember that there's a genetic predisposition. I exercise, I eat healthy, I don't smoke. And these are factors we should always consider when it comes to lifestyle and modifiable risks. So the gift that we could give ourselves as a first step is to know your numbers when it comes to your heart health and know how healthy your heart is so that you know what you need to maintain doing, stop doing, and what you need to actually, continue doing.
Now, you also had an opportunity to speak to Professor Naidu, actually from the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and we actually have an opportunity to have a look at that very conversation. Viewers at home, let's take a look.
Professor, is heart disease also related to strokes?
A heart-brain connection is an absolute connection, and oftentimes we've not been sort of taught that in a way. We always see it as two separate organs and two separate conditions. But yes, it's definitely linked. So it's one condition puts you at risk for the other. So if you have heart disease, you're at risk for strokes, and vice versa. Mind you, doesn't really stop with the heart-brain condition. It also, when you have other comorbidities, even HIV/AIDS, TB, and other like COVID-19, for example, also puts you at risk. But just the heart-brain connection is a very special connection because it forms the strongest part of the circulatory system. You see, and so therefore, just anatomically speaking, it puts you at risk. And of course, if you have had an event like a stroke event, and you continue to lead an unhealthy lifestyle, one can imagine you put yourself at risk for a second stroke or a third stroke, and for heart disease. So yes, the heart and brain are integrally linked.
Wow. And speaking about that link, many times people wait till it's too late in general when it comes to their health. What happens if heart disease is left untreated?
If heart disease is left untreated, you'll have premature deaths. And that's what's happening in the world today, that we still have a global problem where people who die from heart conditions, it's really premature deaths because they're dying before the age of 65 to 70. In a world where there's longevity, in a world where Japan, for example, can reach 80 to 90 as the average age of death, and many other countries in the world, first world countries included, like the US and so on, Europe, people are living till a very ripe old age, but they have the infrastructure and the will, I guess, self-managing. And they have the infrastructure, they can walk, safe cities. So you see, it's a deeper issue because where there's premature deaths, it's not only because the individual is not compliant or adherent to a good lifestyle or healthy behaviors But they also don't have what we are preaching. Many communities in our country, in Africa, rest of Africa, don't have that privilege or the luxury of having a safe city to walk in.
I think what I've learned from today's conversation is that irrespective of the lifestyle changes and the healthy habits we do all try to incorporate, we do have we all carry a certain amount of risk when it comes to stroke and heart disease. So we have to keep active and we have to stay on it. For our viewers at home, what would your advice be? I mean, we've discussed possibilities of the long-term effects can be complete paralysis from a stroke and even death. And the same goes for heart disease. You can die from heart disease. But what would be your lasting long message to our viewers at home when it comes to being mindful and being more aware when it comes to taking charge of their health and making sure they are mitigating the risks of stroke and heart disease?
You and I are on the same page when it comes to do not relegate the responsibility of health and well-being to someone else or to a medical practitioner or to any other clinician or family member. Accept accountability for it because it's your body and it's your health. And the only way to know where you are is to get measured. So if you are afraid of what the numbers will tell you, it means you have not been living a healthy lifestyle or you're afraid of something. I have high blood pressure. And if I get a heart attack or a stroke, I could die or I could have cognitive decline, speech issues, and physical disability. I choose to act on the numbers that I know and measure it to decrease it. And that's opportunity for everyone out there.
Ronald, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. And what I always enjoy about our conversations is that we're always able to give so much of information and insight to our viewers at home, especially when it comes to health, because health is truly wealth. And the more you know about your health and the more you know how to take better care of yourself, the better you can enable yourself to have a long, healthy life. So thank you for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
Viewers at home, that was our resident wellness expert, Ronald Abvajee, and today's conversation was centered around the importance of creating awareness when it comes to stroke and heart disease, as well as the very high risk we technically all have in developing stroke or heart disease in our lifetime. Like you said, the numbers are 1 in 4 people are going to have a stroke, and the numbers are alarming enough. And like Ronald said, don't stay put. Absolutely take charge of your health and make conscious decisions, take mindful decisions to know your numbers and know where you stand so you can take control and take charge of your health. And if you have a family member who possibly struggled from a stroke or possibly is living with heart disease, maybe you understand their condition a little bit better now and you're able to support them a little bit better too. And if you know how much it drastically affects them, you will know how important it is for you to make sure you take every preventative measure possible, especially if you are genetically, if you're genetically more likely for heart disease particularly, or even hypertension. But do engage with us on all our social media platforms. We'd absolutely love to hear more from you and engage with you on any questions you might have. But on that note, it is time for us to head over to an ad break and we'll come right back.